Hello, all. I hope you all are doing well and are enjoying summer. This is Module 3, which is the last recorded module for this course. In this module, we go through the final chapters of the book and we finish up all the material from the book. And then next week, you'll just focus on completing your inquiry project. So in the last module, we spent some time talking about our own cultural awareness and then thinking about what that means to be a multicultural teacher in a classroom as well as in a school. And in this module, this last module, we'll dive a little bit deeper into the skills that we need, thinking about students' linguistics, like what language they speak, as well as the assessments that we use. And then finally, we'll wrap up with chapters 11 and 12, thinking about how we make this work in our own classrooms. So something that I think I forgot to read at the end of the last module that I think is good for us to remember, especially as we're moving into discussions in chapter 9 about language. Education, so this is from the textbook. Education goes beyond academics to the skills needed to flourish in a diverse global world. A culturally responsive educator learns to match the culture and experiences of students to teaching strategies that are effective. Sometimes the skills and attitudes needed by the modern workforce may conflict with the beliefs and traditions of students and their families. The skillful teacher knows how to develop a relationship with students and their families so that they understand that their culture is not being disrespected and students are being taught skills that are necessary in the world of work. So I read that because I think there is, well, I don't think, I know there is a lot of kind of controversy over the role of language in education. Do we focus on teaching only English? Do we support students' home language for those who are not native English speakers? And so this has been something that has been a controversy since the beginning of our country and has gone back and forth a lot over the decades. And so in this chapter, we will spend some time talking about the importance of maintaining a student's native language and as well as a focus on supporting them toward learning English as well. And so this slide just provides a little bit of information about the history of language diversity in our schools. And so this first point says, in our nation, linguistic diversity has commonly been viewed as a temporary troublesome barrier to learning. And I think that that's still true in a lot of places. I think as we are growing and adjusting, and more of us as teachers are learning how to support students who are English language learners or who have English as a second language, we find better strategies to support our students. But for a long time, it's been seen as troublesome and a barrier because we as educators don't typically know the language of our students. And then that creates issues with us trying to teach students who don't speak the same language as us and so on. And so there's always been this push-pull of how fast we introduce and teach English to students who don't speak English fluently. The second point, being fluent in another language, even if one is also fluent in English, has always been viewed with suspicion, at least in the case of immigrants. And so in this chapter, we're going to dive in and think a little bit deeply about why that is, why in this country we often see people who speak multiple languages as deficient versus an asset. I think that for most of us, we would love to be able to speak multiple languages, But in this country, we're not really encouraged to do so in our schools, in our culture. And so we'll learn a little bit more about that and unpack that a little bit and think about what that means for us as educators. And then the last point, as a result of negative views and policies concerning the use of languages other than English in the United States, the language rights of substantial numbers of people have been violated. And so basically, what that means is that by focusing only on teaching English, we are basically stripping away a big part of people's identities and cultures by forcing them to learn a language that may not benefit them in their family and in their culture. And so when we think about language and who benefits from us only learning or only focusing on teaching English, it really doesn't necessarily benefit that individual. It certainly probably doesn't benefit that person's family or their culture. And so when we think of this divide, we have on one side a lack of English skills doesn't necessarily define or explain a student's success or failure in school. So, for a long time, we've had this belief that to be successful in American schools, a person must be fluent in English. And now we're kind of like, I don't know, is that actually true? How do we define success, right? And then on the other side, native language maintenance may act as a buffer against academic failure. And so now we're starting to explore and see and think maybe actually having and maintaining a person's native language can help them in a variety of ways to be more successful in the life that they want to live. Because again, how one person defines success, even as how the government defines success, may not be the same as how one individual or one person's family, culture, etc., defines success. And so ultimately, language minority students may experience trauma from new culture, new language, and associating the reasons for why they left their home country. And so when we're thinking about how we are supporting our students, especially in early childhood, because we're getting students in many cases when they may be very new to this country to learning English, and we have this opportunity to support multiple languages being learned, not just pushing toward English immersion and learning English more completely. And so when we are thinking about the history of linguistic diversity, a lot of it goes back many years, even before any of us were born, to people when they first came to this country, wanting to assimilate, to be a part of the United States, and really feeling like in order to do that, they needed to leave their language and or their native culture or home culture behind. And so many of us are actually the product of that. I know for me, for example, my great grandparents came here from Germany and were fluent speaking German. My grandfather and grandmother, their parents, of course, were the ones who spoke German fluently. But then as they got older and after World War II, when obviously people from Germany were not looked upon favorably in this country, their parents very intentionally stopped teaching them German and refused for them to speak German in the house, even went so far as to change names so that they sounded less German. And so you can see the systematic and intentional erasure of people's language and culture because of the belief systems of the place where they live. And so this, we might think of this as a problem from back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s even, but really this is still happening today. And especially now, with, English being stated as the United States official language. Some people might be surprised that until whenever President Trump signed that executive order, that the United States has never had an official language because we're made up of a rich, diverse population with people who speak many, many languages. And so by proclaiming that English is this country's official language, it takes away from the people who speak a diverse variety of other languages. And so as you are reading through um, this chapter, think about um, what it means to be multilingual, or at least have dual language, um, where you speak two or more languages. And think of the benefits that that has. I'm getting ready to leave for Europe, where in some countries people speak five, six different languages, and the benefits that that gives them. Where here I am going into those countries only speaking English fluently and struggling to be understood and understand in those countries. So, as with teachers, there are many, many problems and challenges related to language. In fact, you'll read about the official words that the government uses to define people who have English as a second language. They're called limited English proficient. So, last module we learned about deficit perspectives. And just thinking about those words, limited English proficient, that starts them out saying you aren't good enough because you do not know English. And so some of the problems that we face, like I said a few minutes ago, is that we haven't, as teachers, received adequate preparation, which that's part of what you're doing right now. You're getting this ESL endorsement, so kudos to you, so that you have good strategies to use to support students who aren't native English speakers. We know that there's a wide variety of programs in schools that either support a student's home language use or completely push towards English proficiency. And so thinking about those different types of programs, the focus of those programs, and how much they vary from school to school, district to district, can be challenging when we think about the overall support that we provide for students. In many schools, we have very low expectations for students who speak English as a second language. We do not see it as an asset. We see it as a challenge to us as teachers and the school system and how we support them. And so really, hopefully we can get to a point someday where we think of this as more of an asset or a benefit for those students and our culture, our nation, versus a deficit. We know that this is sometimes an issue, that if there are programs or schools that have bilingual programs or a program that focuses on supporting native language first, because again, remember, we're in early childhood. Some of these children who don't speak English aren't totally proficient within their own native language. They don't know how to read in their own language, let alone in English. And so we may not have strong bilingual programs within schools. And so then students get stuck learning, they're not learning either language, their native language or English well, which does not serve them well, obviously. And then we know, again, back to this idea there that having bilingual staff is especially challenging. You all are taking that extra step to learn about how to support English language learners, but you aren't necessarily moving into a bilingual program, which I know can provide a lot more resources and supports for students. And so when we think about this, there are lots of different, there's a lot of different information in chapter 9. So I know I'm just scratching the surface here, but when we think about how we are kind of wrapping up this conversation, literally conversation, about language, we need to think about developing more effective strategies for supporting English language learners, which we're doing through this course and others that you're taking. To think about how we can um, infuse a student's culture and language into our curriculum and teaching methods versus trying to make it an add-on at the end. So learning how to interact with others while understanding cultural context is important, not only in the way that we communicate, but also in learning how to um, relate to others. So we want to be sure that we need to think about teaching English language learners um, how to not only master English and focus on, kind of those interpersonal skills in English, but also thinking about how we do that in their home and native language as well. So then this takes us on into chapter 10, which is very closely related to chapter 9. So when we think about how we assess our students, we know that many of our assessments, like standardized assessments in particular, are not linguistically and culturally responsive or appropriate. We've gotten a little bit better over time, but as a general rule and historically, we know that there is an overrepresentation of students, well, actually an over and under representation of students who speak languages other than English in special education because they're overrepresented because if assessments are given in English only and they don't speak English or English isn't their native language, then obviously they're not going to do well on assessments and they're going to perhaps end up in programs that they don't necessarily need to be a part of. On the flip side, sometimes assessments aren't given at all, or deficiencies aren't recognized, or challenges aren't recognized because they're assumed to be related to the fact that a student doesn't speak English fluently. And so as we start to unpack and think about how we assess students, we need to think about how we do that in a way that is linguistically and culturally appropriate. And so let's see here. Let's see if I can get this link to open up. Here we go. That link that I just opened up goes to this reading, which is a reading by Edutopia. This is just an additional resource for you. You aren't required to read this, but I think that it's helpful to get more information about how assessments are developed, what we do to provide supports and accommodations for students who aren't native English speakers, how assessments are used in our education system, and what we as educators can do to support our students through the assessments that we create. We can't necessarily control, obviously, the assessments that are developed by others, but we definitely have a role in the assessments that are created and used within our classroom. So I didn't realize I didn't have another slide here. So let me touch on a few other points. And this actually relates to some of the things that we talked about in Teach 314 earlier this spring. Thinking about the approaches that we use in assessment. And let me see, I made some notes here. One of the things that we focused a lot on in Teach 314 is the importance of authentic assessment. And so in this chapter, in several places, I made a note on pages 335, on page 353. They talk about the importance of authentic assessment and how using authentic assessment and even using things like portfolios and work samples really give a more accurate, less biased view of what a student is able to accomplish and is more inclusive of that student's culture. And so we want to think about how we can try to use more authentic forms of assessment. And then I also made a note that as you're looking through and reading this, thinking about, I made a note on page 347. There's a lot of really great information about bias in assessment. And so this can help you better understand some of the issues that we have with assessment. And honestly, I know many of you are interested in special education as well. And a lot of the laws that we have around culturally and linguistically appropriate assessments come in the disability legislation. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and how we assess our students, either to identify them for special education or support them once they're in and receiving special education services. So there's information there. All right, now we're rolling on into chapter 11. So now we're moving into this action phase of how do I, as a teacher, create a more multicultural space for my students. So multicultural educators have a clear vision and set goals about what they want to accomplish as effective teachers for all learners. So that's from the textbook. So thinking about how you can create a space, a safe, welcoming space for all of your students that are inclusive of everybody's family, culture, beliefs, and values. Knowing that there's not one normal way of being or learning, and getting to know your students, as we've been talking about throughout this entire course, building relationships with your students and your families to better understand their culture, their cultural beliefs, and then thinking about how we pull that into our own teaching is really important. One of the ways that we can do that is by collaborating with others. To get better ideas, strategies. That can be within your school, that can be through online platforms, professional learning communities, professional development. Thinking about having a support network for us can really help us in this work to support our students. I made a note in chapter 11 on page 393, there is a checklist. So it actually goes 392 through 394 for looking at your own classroom to make a decision and determinations about whether you feel like your classroom space is a safe, welcoming place that is inclusive of everyone and supports diverse voices and students in your classroom. And then using that checklist, then you can create your own sort of action plan for supporting your own professional development in this area. So on chapter 11 is all about you as a multicultural educator and ensuring that you're doing the things that you need to become a more multicultural educator. And we're going to watch this video, and this provides some background and information on how we can use more culturally responsive practices in school.
Todos cantando bien, listos. Por mi tierra bendita que es Chihuahua, esta tierra.
Because of the dual language program and our implementation of the culturally responsive instruction, students know that it's a positive environment where they're welcomed and they're loved and they're embraced for who they are. They see themselves in the text. They see themselves in the examples. They see their names in the problems. They want to be there every day, and that helps with our retention.
Muy bien, muy bien.
The mission of Davis Elementary is to celebrate the diversity of our students. We empower our students through bilingual and multicultural experiences.
Our dual language model is a 90-10 model, meaning that kinder and first grade, 90% of the day is in Spanish, 10% is in English. So by the time you get to fifth grade, that it's a 50-50 model.
Me gusta hablar el español y si yo soy bilingüe, yo sé otra forma de comunicarme.
Decir
Culturally responsive teaching is being able to use the cultures and the backgrounds of students to enhance their learning experiences in class. So making sure that I know who they are and where they come from and what their passions are to drive my instruction. Every morning we recite Ina Quech.
La quechua es de cultura indígena maya.
Ina Quech is an ancient saying that you are my other me. So the more positive, kind things that I do to you is a reflection of who I am as a person. It's not just something we repeat every day. That's how we deal with solving conflicts. Like, how can I show Ina Quech every day?
Me gusta porque enseña a niños a respetar a otras personas.
Vamos a repasar los problemas. Aunque no hemos terminado, está bien. Vamos a repasar las preguntas. Today we had an important lesson on metaphors and similes. It was in Spanish, but a lot of them knew metaphors in English, and they were trying to translate them. I think we got into a really deep conversation about not being able to translate certain things. That's part of the culturally relevant aspect, is when students deviate from the lesson plan, but it's beneficial for their learning and it's a connection that they're making and they're passionate about, it's definitely worthwhile.
Sí, exactamente.
The diversity, the languages, that's where our strong point here at Davis is. We use mariachi as a tool to integrate all of the different cultures. It provides a place to be included in, and not all kids feel that.
The mariachi program is important to me because I get to learn my culture.
We teach everything under the sun, from reading music to playing by ear, number systems, color coding. Then Fridays we have the performance of the classes. You get to perform in front of a crowd, so that builds their self-confidence.
Es una gran oportunidad y mi sueño es ser muy fantástico con el mariachi.
When I sing Spanish, it just comes out of me. It makes me want to come to school because not a lot of schools have mariachi.
Having solid programs, or Ina Quech or mariachi, has helped our retention because parents are now reaching out and seeking that. We're big on community building here. You're not just coming to school as an individual, but you're coming to school to build this community.
A lot of people are concerned about test scores and so forth, and I do agree that's important, but it's those day-to-day opportunities that you give our students that will give them a sense of worth of who they are and that they belong, and they connect to what they're learning.
Dame posición, descanso.
Dang, this part is better than me.
All right. Hopefully you pulled some things from that video about supporting students and their cultures. And something that, as I was watching that, I was reminded of is that sometimes we think about multicultural education only benefiting students who are kind of on the outside, the marginalized, the students who are from another culture or speak another language. And we don't always think about the benefits for students who are native who do speak English, who have a more traditional, air quote, traditional American upbringing or culture. So I think that sometimes we, again, getting back to this idea that some of us are, in some ways, we see students who are other, who speak another language, who are from another culture as an outsider or bad or different. We don't always think about the richness that they bring to our classrooms and how they are enhancing the learning of all of our students. And so thinking about that versus how we're just focusing on them and really thinking about infusing that to everything that we do is part of creating a multicultural classroom. And then the final chapter in our book then moves beyond thinking about the four walls of our classroom into how we become part of a more diverse and multicultural school across the whole building, across the district. And so in this video, they talk more about how we do this school-wide and what the role is for you as the teacher.
Adelante, umbral de español, busquen su nombre con su palito, muchas gracias.
There are no blank slates walking into the classroom. Culturally responsive teaching is capitalizing on all that students bring with them from their personal lives and their home lives. And it's really knowing that student, knowing where he or she is from, and using that to craft the most meaningful and rigorous learning opportunities. Here at Amigos, the bilingual school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we are focused on culturally responsive, joyful education.
To borrow Zaretta Hammond's word, culturally responsive practice really is like widening our aperture as adult educators to consider a broader perspective on what strategies can then match with our students' needs if we really want to see more equitable outcomes for our students.
One of the things that we're doing to support that work and our growth as educators are learning walks. Learning walks allow teachers to visit each other's classrooms to see how they are implementing new strategies. We are looking for evidence of equitable student participation, and we're looking to make sure that primarily there's a relationship there, because in order to teach that child, you need to know that child.
Visit the classroom, take notes using our guide.
Tienen un argumento bien fuerte, bien formado. Todos participaron.
We are really looking at what instructional decisions are we making that will support students to have equity of voices, rigor, and consider their different cultures and identities, and really capitalize on that for them to feel safe and authentic and a sense of belonging into our classrooms.
Tessa.
¡Au! Ay, necesito evacuar. Hay bombas en todas partes. Good.
I'm really thinking about what are the different ways that one can organize the instruction so there's diversity of access points to this language and the literature, and for the students to be able to feel comfortable sharing what they know, sharing what they don't know.
Como por eso dice hito en hito, como partes de su vida que lo convierten en quien es.
I really thought that one of the strengths was your use of the vocabulary and then giving students the tools they needed to use it themselves.
We come back together for a debrief. We look at questions that may emerge and any recommendations that we've come up with.
Everyone ended up being engaged at some point.
We were struck by the variety and the depth of voice that students were demonstrating in her class. We heard lots of different voices, and that was exciting to see and hear.
We need to make sure that they all feel represented, they all feel safe to do their best learning, they all feel respected. And I think that's a lifelong process for any educator. Culturally responsive teaching isn't something that you say, I went to a professional development session, I'm all set. Check the box. It's something you have to dedicate a lot of time to throughout your career to make sure that you're doing the best for the students.
All right, so I think that I really like that video. I made some notes as I was going through. I've watched it a lot of times, but some of the things that I made a note about are thinking about things, and one of the things that I like that they talked about is considering broader perspectives. to infuse within our teaching to improve our own teaching so that we are creating more equitable spaces for all of our students. I really liked the one teacher that said, to teach a child, you must know the child. And so I think that that really encapsulates everything that we are hoping you get from this course, is really getting to know your students on a deeper level so that you can be more responsive to their needs and understanding who they are, and then infusing that information within your teaching. I also really liked, and I hope you did too, this idea of doing learning walks within the school. And that supports what we read in chapter 11 about collaboration and the importance of feeling like you have other people that you can collaborate with and learn with and from related to this work. And so I really like that idea of having and providing space and time and opportunity for teachers to go and learn from one another within the school, but also across schools and within other ways, conferences, webinars, blogs, all those different types of things, so that you provide more or understand better how to do this work within your own classroom. Some things I wanted to just highlight from chapter 12, and obviously these are just tidbits, but please read everything because there's a lot of great information in here. On page 421, they talk about the importance of using data to make decisions about what you do within the school. And so thinking about, as a teacher, how you are a part of collecting that data that then is used to make decisions about the broader population within the school. So there's more information about that. Just as in chapter 11, there's a checklist to think about how you can improve your own classroom space and get professional development to improve your classroom. In chapter 12, there's information about creating a school-wide action plan as well. And so thinking about how you as the teacher are part of that whole school environment and how you can be learning about information from you for your classroom and how that contributes to the overall school, the broader population. And then the last thing is just, I want to encourage you to go back to page 37 in the textbook. And at the beginning of class, I asked you to think about doing a self-assessment. So on page 37, there's a self-assessment about yourself. Some of the things aren't going to change, but some things about the way that you may think about teaching, about education, hopefully have shifted, and you've grown a little bit as a result of what you've learned in this class. So that is all that I have for you. The next module or next week is all about you completing your inquiry project. So if you're having questions about that or need any additional information, as always, please reach out to me through email and I'm happy to help. Otherwise, I hope that you've enjoyed this class. I am a little sad that I haven't gotten to see you every week talking about these things, because there is obviously a lot of rich discussion around these topics. But I am enjoying reading your discussion posts that are related. So take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your summer.